Hey fellows, um, welcome to my channel, and in this video we are going to look at function concepts in JavaScript. Particularly we're going to look at function invocations and function instance creation using functions. What are the difference between those two? How you should not mix those two functionalities and how you should treat them separately. We'll see demo on the differences, and also we'll see a fun exercise, something that I found from another person recently, some fun exercise which will give you more insight into how these two concepts, function invocation versus instance creation using functions, are two different things and not to be confused with. So let's get started. Let me go to the other scene where I have, all right. Hope you're able to see my screen. Okay. All right. So these are the topics that we are going to cover today. Function invocation and functions used in instance creations. Let me just bring my JavaScript file here so that we can see what we're doing. So let's take some function. I have here a function called foo, and it is doing a couple of things. Right? There's a console log, and it's returning something. If we execute foo in this fashion, just simply invoking that function and take that result into a variable, this is function invocation. And if you use the new keyword on that function while you're calling that, this is called instance creation, right? And if you take that result or whatever is returned, we'll see that in a minute, into F2, um, you would be wondering, what is the difference? Sometimes there would be some differences between these two. That's what we're going to look at next. Um, so when we use function as in function invocation, we just simply invoke the function, execute the function, and take the returned value into a variable. Uh, it will get whatever is returned out of this. Let's see that. And when you're doing it as a function constructor, whatever is returned out of that function is not of any concern. It will not come and stay, get assigned to that variable. In fact, it is going to get discarded. And whatever you add to the this context in that function is what matters when you're creating an instance, right? That's what comes into F2 here. So let's quickly check this example. Let me copy this and put it in my uh, code editor, and right, so we have these two, and I have Quokka installed. Quokka is a plugin which instantly runs the JavaScript. When you enable that, it runs that file. You just have to trigger that, and then it will show the result. So now if I console log F1, console.log F1, what would you see? You see 20, and 20 is actually returned out of this. So when you execute a function and take the result into a variable, whatever is returned out of that function comes into that variable. But when you do it in this fashion using the new keyword, which is the instance creation pattern, let's see what happens, right? So like I said before here, um, the object that gets created using this context will be assigned here. So as you can see, F2 points to A:10, and you won't get the returned output. This returned output is discarded. It won't be coming here. So this is a very good interview question that you might get. So will you get that return value into F2 or this context? And always this context will come as a new object. Okay, so there's one more thing here that we need to note. If you're using this context within that function and using it as a function invocation, it is going to pull you the global context. Yes, that is true. because when this function is getting executed, when on line number 2, it will say, okay, we have this, but are we using this new keyword? No, we are not using. Okay, so then we have to decide what is the this. Uh, what goes into the this context, or this variable, or this keyword, and it would see instantly that the global object is the one that has to go here, depending on how you executed it. If it is a simple execution, the global context will be the this keyword. So it'll add a to the global context. We can check that using console.log global.a, and this will be 10. Okay, this is happening like this because you're adding something to this keyword, and you're not using the new keyword to create an instance. You're using it to simply invocate the function. So that is also one gotcha that you have to remember. Okay, so these two things are really important, and I hope you got the difference between these two. One is that if you invoke a function and you have something, some statements that say this dot something equals to something, you are actually polluting the global context. And if you're using the instance creation signature on a function, whatever return value will be discarded, will not be taken. Right? Those two things are really important on uh, in this scenario. And since that's the case, since these two are really important and there are major differences, there are important differences between these two approaches, the invocation approach and the instance creation approach. Um, they can almost never be used interchangeably, these two approaches on the same function, right? So you can't interchangeably use these without side effects, right? Um, so that's what we're going to check. I mean, that's what we want to stress. And then the other concept before moving on to the fun exercise is called function chaining. We want to also understand what function chaining is before we go ahead with that fun exercise. So what exactly is function chaining, right? So you might see if you used some other function-based programming languages, there will be chaining of functions or methods available there. If you used object-oriented programming languages also, so there will be chaining between the methods within the same class, right? So how would you enable that in JavaScript? There is this traditional way. If you are using object-oriented programming, this is the traditional way, right? This is the recommended approach that people all over the world they would say this is the way to do it. Let's quickly replicate that. So, and even in JavaScript, one more thing to add is jQuery and Lodash have they have also this chaining approach where you can minimize the amount of code you write by simply chaining those methods. So let's see how this works. Let me just simply copy all this. So what we're doing here, we're creating a foo class with a capital F, and we're adding name, some dummy name, and then we're adding two methods to the prototype of foo, and we're creating an instance of foo, which is having a variable foo with the small f. Now, I mean, like I said here, like I printed, um, if you do foo dot bar, this is going to work. It'll simply print. Um, but if you say foo dot print, that also works. It is going to print. But if you chain them like this, foo dot bar dot print, this will not work because it says cannot read property print of undefined. What that means is when you see, if you want to see, if you see how this execution happens one by one, right? So it'll take the foo variable and it executes this foo dot bar expression, and then whatever comes out of that expression will be fed into the dot print. So that will become the context of the print method. And so if you see the bar signature, nothing is coming out of it, right? There's no return value. So that's the reason it is this part is returning undefined. And then you are trying to invoke dot print method on undefined. That's why you see cannot read property print of undefined. So so as a solution for this approach, when you're using this approach to basically you know uh, implement chaining, you have to do one more line here, which is return this. You have to return this. So this refers to whatever is the object that gets created when you instantiate it, right? So it gets returned, and that same object also has will contain the same print and bar functions because they are part of the prototype chain. So this works now, right? So if I want to chain the print object, print method as well, so you have to do this, right? So now there's no error, okay? And so these two statements got executed. You can do dot bar, dot print any number of times, and there won't be any error. Okay, it'll simply log these statements again and again and again. So that is how you uh, do chaining or implement chaining in functions using object-oriented programming or using function constructors and prototype chains. Right? The goal is that you have to return the this context or the this keyword in every of those functions that you want to or methods that you want to be chainable, right? So then this works. That's what we saw here. Now the fun question. So now that we understood, okay, so this is chaining, and these are the differences between function invocation and instance creation, and we saw what these things are. Now the fun question comes up. Okay, so the question looks like this. Don't look at the answer. Let me just copy this. Okay, and let me move up. Okay, let me remove everything, and then this is the question. Let me just move this a little bit. And yeah, so the question is, foo is the function, and it has to take a value, and then it should have a dot add function. If I invoke that and pass a value, it should be added, and then dot subtract also is there. If I invoke that on the resultant and then give a number, it should subtract, and then finally when I do dot print, it should print it. It should print 12 because 10 plus 5 is 15 minus 3 is 12. So it should print 12. Now, how would you do this? Till now, whatever we learned based on that, if you think about that, if you want to do it in that fashion, you are not going to succeed because that only works for instance creation, right? So the foo here should be an instance of the foo method, but there is no instance creation here. There's no new keyword here, right? So now think about this. Let's write this one more time. Let's write this, copy this whole thing. I'll try to modify it to work according to our functionality. There is an add and there's a num. Okay, let's take the num here. And then let's say I want to, you might be thinking in this fashion initially, which is the wrong way to look at it. We'll come to that in a bit. So, but let me just try to type out the approach that you might be thinking. So you might be thinking, okay, let me create a constructor function where the first 10 value will be sent there, and then I'm going to add it to this context, and then I'm going to say this dot num plus equals to num. So let me add that to this number, and then there's a subtract on this, and then foo, and then the subtract. In subtract, I'm going to say this dot num minus equals to num. This num comes here, so let me put it there before using it. num. Now I'm going to say f equals to new foo, and then if I say um, console.log, and then there should be a print. So let me just write that as well. Foo dot prototype dot print equals to function, and then we're going to say that we're not passing anything here. We'll simply return this dot num, and let's print it out there. So I'll say f dot um, here I have to pass initially 10, right? F dot what is that? Okay, add 5, subtract 3 dot print. So now subtract is subtract. What did I say? Subtract. Okay, here as we discussed here, we need to return this, right? Otherwise the chaining is not possible. So now you can see 12 is there. Now this solution is working, but it is working with the new variable, new uh, invocation or new instance creation. It's not just the function invocation that they asked here. So what if I remove this? What if I remove this one? Now let's see what happens. So it gets, so if we invoke like this, like we saw earlier, it gets whatever is returned out of this, and nothing is returned out of that. So it says can't find add property of undefined, which is the correct message or error message, right? So then what do we do now? So obviously looking at this approach will not work for this kind of scenario. So if you came this far and thought this is the solution, then you're mistaken. So it cannot be done using the prototype and this context. It should be done in a different way, and that different way is using, because let's think about this. So we have to return something because that something should contain these methods, right? So that something should be an object, because only object can contain methods. So I'm going to change this signature to make it work. Let's see, right? So I'm going to return an object because we have to chain them. We should have methods. So this object should contain a reference to that num. So I'm going to say num equals num, and then I'm going to add all these methods. Add is a function, n will be the number that is taken. Subtract is a function, n is going to be taken, and print is a function, right? And it returns this dot num. Let's see. So this is the signature we want. If we do this and run this, foo10 will return this object, and add is there on this object, so it gets executed, and we have to do something here to make the rest of the chain working, right? So I think we can safely use this approach now. And what do you think this here would point to? It points to the object, right? Because it's we're creating an object, brand new object, and we're adding methods on the fly to it, and then we're referring to its own props or its own properties of that object using this context. So this should totally work, right? So let's put the same thing. So I'm going to say this dot num plus equals to n. So here this dot num doesn't point to this doesn't point to f, right? Or it points to f, but it's not a new instance created. It's just whatever is returned out of that. So which is this same object. So dot num means the same number that we are putting here, right? So we can add it, but for the chaining to work, we have to return this. Again, here also this dot num minus equals to n, and return this. Okay, and then print can return the number, this dot num. Now, if we write this, will it work? We can safely remove these prototype chains, and then we can simply check, and yeah, this works. You can see 12 is outputted, and yeah, if we pass another number, like let's say I mean, you don't even have to create variable here. We can simply take this foo of 10 and put it here, same thing, and let's say 20 plus 7 minus 12, which is 15, right? So this totally works. So this is actually the solution for this problem, this fun exercise. Now we've seen how chaining is possible. We've seen how function invocation is different from instance creation. So you can't add methods to the prototype if you're just using invocation. You have to do it in this way, right? Return a function, an object, and then add methods to that object, so that when you invoke, this object will be created on the fly. It is getting created, and then it is returned. And because these methods are added on the fly to this, it is and you are returning this, it is always chainable, because the same object is returned again and again by all these methods. I mean, first two methods. So I hope this made sense. And in ES6 there is a shortcut version of this, right? It looks like this. If you're creating object on the fly like this and then adding methods, you don't have to use the function keyword. You can simply do this and it should work. And there's a shorthand for this as well. So if the key of the object is same as the variable name, you can simply put that variable name and it also should work, right? Okay. So this has greatly also reduced the amount of code. So yeah, that's the solution. That's the way you have to write it. So that's the final solution we have. If you have any questions on this pattern, on uh, using function invocation and chaining methods, or if you want any clarification on any other items, just do let me know in the comments, and I'll try to probably create um, a new video with those, with those concepts. So I'll try to upload these notes to my GitHub, and I'll share you the link to this note, and also this code snippet and everything, so you can try it on your own. Okay, that's it for now, for today. I think this has been a long and fruitful video. I hope that it really helps you understand the nuances of function creation, function invocation versus instance creation concept in JavaScript, and hope to see you around for more videos. Thanks for watching.